I should have known something was off when they hired me on the spot. No background check, no references, just a quick handshake and, "Can you start tonight?" But when you're 3 months behind on rent and living off ramen noodles, you don't ask too many questions. The job seemed simple enough: night security at Riverside Storage, one of those sprawling self-storage facilities on the outskirts of town. The pay was decent, better than anything I'd seen in months, and the hours weren't terrible. Midnight to 8 a.m., just me and a bunch of storage units filled with people's forgotten junk. How hard could it be? The manager, a guy named Rick who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, met me at the gate that first night. He was probably in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of tired eyes that suggested he'd seen too much of whatever this place had to offer. "You're Mike, right?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Sorry about the rush, but our last guy just, well, he quit suddenly. Left us in a real bind." I nodded, trying to look professional despite the fact that I was wearing the only clean shirt I had left. "No problem. I'm just grateful for the opportunity." Rick gave me this look, not quite pity, but something close to it. "Yeah, well, let's hope you stick around longer than the others." That should have been my first red flag, but like I said, I needed the money. He led me through the facility, pointing out the different sections. The place was massive, probably 100 units spread across several buildings. Most of the storage units were the standard roll-up door types, but there were some larger ones that looked more like small warehouses. The whole place was lit by these harsh fluorescent lights that cast everything in this weird, sickly glow. "Your main job is just to make sure nobody's breaking in," Rick explained as we walked. "We've had some issues with people trying to bust into units, steal stuff. You just patrol the grounds, check the gates, make sure everything's secure." He showed me to the security office, a small trailer parked near the front entrance. Inside was a desk, a couple of monitors showing camera feeds, and a logbook where I was supposed to record my rounds. "Pretty straightforward," Rick said, handing me a set of keys and a flashlight. "Just do a walkthrough every hour or so, write it down in the log. There's a coffee maker if you need it, and the bathrooms are in Building C." I was about to ask about the cameras when Rick cleared his throat and pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "Now, there are a few special procedures you need to follow during your shift," he said, his tone suddenly more serious. "Nothing too complicated, just some rules we've had to put in place for, safety reasons." He handed me the paper, and I could see his hand was shaking slightly. "These are important, Mike. I mean it. Follow these rules exactly, and you'll be fine. Don't follow them." He trailed off, shaking his head. I unfolded the paper and read the title, "Night Shift Protocols, Riverside Storage." Below that was a list of rules, written in what looked like several different handwritings, as if they'd been added over time. Rule 1: Always carry the master key ring with you during patrols. Never leave it in the office. Rule 2: Do not investigate any sounds coming from Unit 47. If you hear anything from that unit, note it in the log and continue your patrol. Rule 3: If you encounter someone claiming to be a tenant after midnight, ask them to show their rental agreement. Real tenants will have one. If they cannot produce it, escort them off the property immediately. Rule 4: The storage unit doors should never be opened during your shift. If you find an open unit, close it immediately and do not look inside. Rule 5: If you see lights flickering in Building D, do not enter that building for the remainder of your shift. Rule 6: Do not use the bathroom in Building C between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Rule 7: If you hear children laughing, it is not children. Return to the office immediately and wait for the sound to stop. Rule 8: Unit 23 in Building A should remain padlocked at all times. If you find this unit unlocked, do not open it. Radio for assistance immediately. Rule 9: If someone knocks on the office door during your shift, check the cameras before answering. If you cannot see anyone on the cameras, do not open the door. Rule 10 *. Never enter Unit 84. Under no circumstances. The door is marked with yellow tape, this is not a mistake. I looked up at Rick, who was watching me carefully. This is a lot of rules for a storage facility. Yeah, well, this place has its quirks, he said, not meeting my eyes. Look, I know it seems weird, but just follow the list and you'll be fine. The last few guys who worked here, they didn't take the rules seriously. What happened to them? Rick was quiet for a long moment. One quit after his first night. Wouldn't even tell me why, just handed back his keys and walked out. The other guy. He paused, running a hand through his hair. Let's just say he's not working anywhere anymore. I wanted to ask what that meant, but something in Rick's expression told me I didn't want to know. Look, I've got to head out, Rick said, checking his watch. You've got my number if there's an emergency, but try to handle things yourself if you can. And Mike? He stopped at the door of the trailer. Take those rules seriously. They're there for a reason. With that, he left me alone with my thoughts and a very unsettling list of rules. The first few hours were pretty uneventful. I did my patrol, checked all the buildings, made sure the gates were secure. The place was dead quiet except for the occasional sound of trucks on the nearby highway. I was starting to think this job might actually be easier than I'd expected. It was around 2 a.m. when things started getting weird. I was sitting in the office, catching up on some paperwork, when I heard what sounded like metal clanging against metal. It was coming from somewhere in the facility, but it was hard to tell exactly where. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out to investigate. The sound seemed to be coming from Building A, so I headed in that direction. As I got closer, I could hear it more clearly. It sounded like someone was trying to force open one of the storage unit doors. I turned the corner into Building A and immediately saw the problem. Unit 23 was standing wide open, the padlock that should have been securing it lying on the ground. My blood ran cold as I remembered Rule 8, Unit 23 in Building A should remain padlocked at all times. If you find this unit unlocked, do not open it. Radio for assistance immediately, But the unit was already open. I stood there for a moment, staring at the gaping entrance. It was pitch black inside, and my flashlight beam didn't seem to penetrate very far into the darkness. There was something wrong with the air around the unit. It felt heavier somehow, like the atmosphere just before a thunderstorm. I reached for my radio to call Rick, but then I heard something that made my heart stop. From inside the unit came the sound of someone crying. Not loud, just soft, muffled sobs that seemed to echo from deep within the storage space. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The crying continued, and despite every rational thought in my head telling me not to, I found myself taking a step closer to the unit. Hello? I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. Is someone in there? The crying stopped immediately. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. I stood there, flashlight in hand, staring into the black void of Unit 23, waiting for something to happen. Then I heard footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, coming from inside the unit and getting closer to the entrance. My body finally decided to cooperate with my brain, and I turned and ran back toward the office as fast as I could. I slammed the trailer door behind me and immediately grabbed the radio. Rick, this is Mike, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We've got a problem with Unit 23. Static crackled through the radio for a moment before Rick's tired voice came through. What kind of problem? The padlock is off and the door is open. I think someone might be inside. There was a long pause. Did you look inside the unit? No, but I heard Dash. Good, Rick interrupted. Don't go back there. I'll handle it in the morning. But what if someone's trapped in there? I heard crying Dash. Mike. Rick's voice was sharp now. Stay away from Unit 23. That's not a request, it's an order. Continue your patrol, avoid Building A for the rest of your shift. The radio went dead. I sat there staring at the radio, my mind racing. What the hell was in Unit 23? And why was Rick so insistent that I stay away from it? I tried to focus on other things, but I couldn't shake the sound of that crying. It had sounded so real, so desperate. What if someone really was trapped in there? By 3 a.m., I'd convinced myself that I had to at least check on the situation. I wasn't going to go inside the unit, but I could at least see if the door was still open. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way back to Building A, my heart pounding with each step. As I approached Unit 23, I could see that the door was still wide open, just as I'd left it. But something was different. There was a smell now, something awful that seemed to drift out of the unit. It was sweet and rotten at the same time, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. I covered my nose with my shirt and took a few steps closer. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the dust outside the unit. Small ones, like they'd been made by a child. They led from the unit's entrance toward the back of the building. I followed the prints with my flashlight beam, my hands shaking. They were clear and fresh, and they led directly to the back exit of Building A. The door that should have been locked was standing wide open. Someone, or something, had definitely been in Unit 23, and now they were loose in the facility. I should have called Rick again. I should have stayed in the office and waited for morning. Instead, I found myself following the footprints out into the night. The trail led across the main driveway toward Building D. As I approached the building, I noticed that the lights inside were flickering erratically. Rule 5: if you see lights flickering in Building D, do not enter that building for the remainder of your shift. I stopped dead in my tracks. The footprints continued toward the building's entrance, but I couldn't follow them any further. Not if I wanted to keep this job. I turned to head back to the office, but as I did, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Children laughing. It was coming from inside Building D, echoing off the metal walls. High-pitched giggles that seemed to bounce around the building like trapped birds. Rule 7: if you hear children laughing, it is not children. Return to the office immediately and wait for the sound to stop. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran back to the office, my heart hammering against my ribs. I slammed the door and locked it, then collapsed into the desk chair. The laughter continued for what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes. When it finally stopped, the silence was deafening. I checked the cameras, but they only showed empty hallways and closed storage units. Whatever was happening in Building D wasn't showing up on the feeds. The rest of the night passed in a blur of anxiety and paranoia. Every sound made me jump, every shadow seemed to move. I did my patrols, but I avoided Building A and Building D entirely. I wasn't taking any more chances. When Rick showed up at 8 a.m., I was ready with a dozen questions. But he took one look at my face and shook his head. "Don't," he said simply. "I can see it in your eyes. You heard them too, didn't you?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Unit 23? Yeah. And the children laughing in Building D." Rick sighed deeply and sat down heavily in the spare chair. "How long have you been working night shifts, Mike?" "This is my first one, actually." He looked surprised. "Really? Most people don't make it through their first night. You did better than I expected. What the hell is going on here, Rick? What's in Unit 23? Rick was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "You ever hear of people storing things they shouldn't store? Things that aren't quite legal?" I nodded. "Well, sometimes people store things that aren't quite natural either." My mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" "This facility has been here for almost 30 years, Rick said. In that time, we've had all kinds of people rent units. Most of them are normal, people moving, downsizing, that kind of thing. But some of them. He trailed off. Some of them what? Some of them were running from things. Or hiding things. Things that maybe shouldn't be hidden. I felt a chill run down my spine. Are you telling me that Unit 23 has something supernatural in it? Rick laughed, but there was no humor in it. Supernatural. That's a nice way to put it. I prefer to think of it as things that science hasn't figured out how to explain yet. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the facility. The previous owner of Unit 23 was a woman named Eleanor Marsh. Sweet old lady, paid her rent on time, never caused any trouble. But she was eccentric. Always talking about her collection and how important it was to keep it safe. What kind of collection? That's the thing, nobody knew. She was very secretive about it. But she'd been renting that unit for almost 15 years when she died last month. She died? Car accident. But here's the weird part, when we tried to contact her family about the unit, we found out she didn't have any family. No relatives, no friends, nobody. It was like she just appeared out of nowhere 15 years ago. I thought about the crying I'd heard coming from the unit. So what's in there now? Honestly? I don't know. And I don't want to know. We've had 3 different night guards since Eleanor died, and none of them lasted more than a few nights. They all heard things coming from Unit 23. Why don't you just open it? Clear out whatever's in there? Rick turned to look at me, and I could see genuine fear in his eyes. Because the last time someone opened that unit during the day, they found it completely empty. Whatever's in there only seems to exist at night. I felt like the room was spinning. That's impossible. Yeah, that's what I thought too. Until I started working here. Rick pulled out a cigarette and lit it with shaking hands. The thing is, Mike, this place attracts certain kinds of people. People who have things they need to keep hidden. Not all of those things are physical objects. What are you saying? I'm saying that some people rent storage units to store things that can't be stored anywhere else. Things that exist in the spaces between what we understand and what we're afraid to understand. I stared at him, trying to process what he was telling me. You're talking about ghosts. I'm talking about things that are worse than ghosts. Ghosts are just echoes of people who used to be alive. What we're dealing with here. He took a long drag of his cigarette. These are things that were never alive to begin with. A cold wave of fear washed over me as I remembered the footprints I'd seen outside Unit 23. Small ones, like they'd been made by a child. The children laughing, I said quietly. Rick nodded grimly. That's been going on for about 2 weeks now. Ever since we found Unit 23 open the first time. You mean this has happened before? 3 times. Every time, one of our night guards finds the unit standing open. Every time, they hear the crying. And every time, something gets loose in the facility. I thought about the footprints leading to Building D, gets loose. The children laughing. That's new. Before, it was just the crying. But it's getting stronger, whatever it is. More active. Rick stubbed out his cigarette and looked at me seriously. Look, Mike, I like you. You seem like a decent guy, and you followed the rules better than most. But I have to ask, are you sure you want to keep working here? Because it's only going to get worse. I thought about my rent, my empty refrigerator, my maxed out credit cards. I need this job, Rick. He nodded slowly. I figured you'd say that. Okay, but we need to add some new rules to the list. Things are escalating, and the old rules might not be enough anymore. He pulled out a pen and started writing on the back of the rules sheet. Rule 11 *, if you find muddy footprints anywhere in the facility, do not follow them. Report their location in the log and avoid that area for the remainder of your shift. Rule 12 *, if the temperature in any building suddenly drops, leave immediately. Do not try to investigate the cause. Rule 13 *, if you hear your name being called, do not respond. It is not a person calling you. Rule 14 *, if you see a child in the facility, do not approach them. Children are not allowed on the property after hours. Rule 15 *, if Unit 23 is found open again, do not attempt to close it. Radio for assistance and maintain a distance of at least 50 feet from the unit. Rick handed me the updated list. These should help keep you safer. But Mike, I'm serious, if you ever feel like you're in real danger, just leave. The job isn't worth your life. That should have been my cue to quit. Any rational person would have walked away right then and there. But I wasn't thinking rationally. I was thinking about the stack of unpaid bills on my kitchen table and the notice from my landlord threatening eviction. I'll be fine, I said, though I didn't feel fine at all. Rick shook his head. Famous last words. All right, I'll see you tomorrow night. And Mike? Good luck. The second night started off quiet enough. I did my rounds, checked the buildings, made sure everything was secure. Unit 23 was still padlocked, and Building D seemed normal. I was starting to think maybe the previous night had been a fluke. I was wrong. It was around 1 a.m. when I heard the first sound, metal groaning, like something heavy was being dragged across a concrete floor. It was coming from Building C. I grabbed my flashlight and headed in that direction, mentally running through the rules. There wasn't anything about sounds from Building C, so I figured it was safe to investigate. The sound was coming from the back of the building, near the public restrooms. As I got closer, I could see that one of the storage unit doors was slightly ajar. It was Unit 47. Rule 2 *, do not investigate any sounds coming from Unit 47. If you hear anything from that unit, note it in the log and continue your patrol *. I stopped walking and pulled out my logbook. 1:15 a.m., sounds from Unit 47, metal dragging noise, I wrote. Then I turned around and headed back toward the office. But as I walked away, I heard something else. A voice, muffled but distinct, coming from inside Unit 47. Help me, it said. Please, someone help me. I froze. The voice sounded weak, desperate. What if someone was actually trapped in there? But the rules were clear. Do not investigate sounds from Unit 47. Please, the voice called out again. I can't get out. The door is stuck. Every fiber of my being wanted to help, but I forced myself to keep walking. I'd learned my lesson the night before about not following the rules. I made it about halfway back to the office before I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, dragging footsteps, like someone was having trouble walking. I turned around and saw a figure stumbling out of Building C. It was a man, middle-aged, wearing what looked like a maintenance uniform. He was limping heavily, and even from a distance, I could see that something was wrong with him. Hey, he called out when he saw me. Thank God, I thought I was going to be stuck in there all night. I approached him cautiously, remembering Rule 3, if you encounter someone claiming to be a tenant after midnight, ask them to show their rental agreement. Can I see your rental agreement? I asked, keeping my distance. The man looked confused. Rental agreement? I don't have a rental agreement. I work here. I'm the maintenance guy. That didn't make sense. Rick had never mentioned a maintenance crew, and besides, why would a maintenance worker be here at 1 a.m.? What's your name? I asked. Dave, he said, still limping toward me. Dave Morrison. I was fixing a leak in one of the units when the door got stuck. I've been trapped in there for hours. As he got closer, I could see his face more clearly in the beam of my flashlight. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, the entire eye, including the whites, was black as coal. I took a step back. I'm going to need to see some ID. Dave smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. His teeth were yellow and broken, and when he opened his mouth, I could smell something rotten. "I don't think that's necessary," he said, and his voice had changed. It was deeper now, with a strange echo to it, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. I turned and ran. Behind me, I could hear Dave, or whatever was pretending to be Dave, following me. But his footsteps were different now. Instead of the slow, limping gait he'd had before, he was moving fast, and his feet were making a sound like metal claws scraping against concrete. I reached the office and slammed the door behind me, my hands shaking as I turned the lock. I grabbed the radio and called Rick. "Rick, this is Mike. I need help. There's someone here who's not supposed to be here." "What do you mean?" Rick's voice came through the radio, groggy with sleep. "I found someone claiming to be a maintenance worker. He came out of Unit 47, and he doesn't look right." There was a long pause. "Mike, we don't have a maintenance crew." "And Unit 47?" Another pause. "Unit 47 has been empty for 3 years." My blood ran cold. "What?" "The last tenant was a guy named Dave Morrison. He was a maintenance worker at a factory across town. But Mike, Dave Morrison died 3 years ago." I looked out the window of the office, and my heart nearly stopped. Dave was standing just outside, staring directly at me. His black eyes seemed to reflect the light from inside the trailer, and his broken-toothed smile was wider than any human smile should be. He raised one hand and tapped on the window with his fingernail. Except it wasn't a fingernail, it was a long, curved claw that scraped against the glass with a sound like chalk on a blackboard. "Mike, are you still there?" Rick's voice came through the radio. "He's right outside the office," I whispered. "Whatever you do, don't let him in." Dave Morrison was unstable when he was alive. He had a history of violence. There's no telling what he might be capable of now. Dave tapped on the window again, and this time he spoke. His voice was muffled by the glass, but I could still hear him clearly. "Let me in, Mike," he said. "I just want to talk." I backed away from the window, my heart pounding. "How does he know my name?" "They always know," Rick said grimly. "Mike, I want you to stay in that office until sunrise. Don't come out, no matter what he says or does." Dave's tapping became more insistent, and his smile grew even wider. "Come on, Mike. I know you can hear me. I just want to show you something." "I'm not opening the door," I said, loud enough for him to hear. Dave's expression changed instantly. The fake smile disappeared, replaced by a look of pure rage. He pressed his face against the window, his black eyes boring into mine. "You will open this door," he said, his voice no longer even pretending to be human. It was a growl now, deep and threatening. "You will open it, or I will find another way in." As if to emphasize his point, he dragged his claws across the window, leaving deep scratches in the glass. I stayed in that office for the next 6 hours, watching Dave pace back and forth outside. Sometimes he would try to look friendly, smiling and waving like he was just a normal person. Other times, he would press his face against the window and make horrible faces, his features contorting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Around 4 a.m., he started talking to me again. "You know, Mike, I used to work here," he said conversationally. "Not officially, of course. But I had a key to Unit 47. That's where I kept my tools." I didn't respond, but he continued anyway. "I was fixing a leak in there one night when the door got stuck. Just like I told you. But what I didn't tell you was that I was stuck in there for 3 days before anyone found me." Dave's reflection in the window seemed to waver, like he was made of smoke. 3 days without food or water. 3 days in the dark, banging on the door, screaming for help. "Do you know what that's like, Mike?" I could hear the anger building in his voice again. "By the time they found me, I was already dead. Heart attack, they said. Brought on by dehydration and panic. But here's the funny thing, I didn't stay dead. Dave pressed his face against the window again, and I could see that his skin was starting to look translucent. I could make out the bones underneath. Death is just another kind of storage, Mike. And sometimes, what gets stored doesn't stay put. Around 5 a.m., Dave suddenly stopped pacing and looked off toward Building A. His entire demeanor changed, the rage disappeared, replaced by what looked like fear. "She's awake," he whispered, backing away from the window. "I have to go." "Who's awake?" I called out, but Dave was already moving toward Building A, his form becoming more and more transparent with each step. By the time he reached Building A, he had faded away completely. I stayed in the office until Rick arrived at 8 a.m. When I told him what had happened, he just nodded grimly. "Dave Morrison shows up about once a month," he said. "Usually around the anniversary of his death. He's harmless as long as you don't let him in." Harmless? He had claws. Well, relatively harmless. The thing is, he's not the real problem. He's just a side effect. A side effect of what? Rick looked toward Building A, Unit 23. "Whatever Eleanor Marsh stored in there, it's getting stronger. And when it gets stronger, it affects the other residents." "Other residents?" "Mike, this place has been a storage facility for 30 years. In that time, we've had dozens of people die on the property. Heart attacks, accidents, a few suicides. Most of them move on eventually, but some of them stick around. Usually, they keep to themselves. But when Unit 23 gets active..." He didn't need to finish. I understood. "How many are there?" "We're not sure. Dave is the most active, but there are others. A woman who died in a car accident in the parking lot in 1998. A teenager who overdosed in one of the units in 2005. An old man who had a stroke while moving his stuff in 2012. I felt sick. Why didn't you tell me this before? Would you have taken the job if I had?" He had a point. "Look, Mike, I know this is a lot to take in. But most nights, you won't see any of them. They only get active when something disturbs them. And as long as you follow the rules, you should be fine." Should be fine. That wasn't exactly the reassurance I was looking for. But again, I thought about my bills, my rent, the fact that I hadn't eaten a decent meal in weeks. "What about Unit 23? You said it's getting stronger." Rick sighed. "That's the real problem. We've contacted everyone we can think of, paranormal investigators, priests, even a few professors who study this kind of thing. Nobody wants to touch it." "Why not?" "Because whatever Eleanor Marsh stored in there, it's not just supernatural. It's intelligent. And it learns." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean, it learns?" "The rules we've given you, those aren't just random precautions. They're based on the experiences of previous guards. Every time someone breaks a rule, whatever's in Unit 23 learns something new about how to interact with our world." Rick pulled out the list of rules and pointed to Rule 7, "If you hear children laughing, it is not children." This rule exists because one of our guards heard children laughing and went to investigate. He found what looked like 3 kids playing in Building D. When he approached them, they turned around, and their faces were wrong. Completely wrong. He quit that same night, but not before whatever was pretending to be children learned how to make itself visible. I thought about the footprints I'd seen leading to Building D, so every time someone breaks a rule, the entity gets stronger, more capable, and the rules become more complex. Rick showed me a different piece of paper, older, yellowed with age. This was the original list from when we first started having problems with Unit 23. There were only 3 rules. I read the short list. Rule 1: Do not open Unit 23. Rule 2: if you hear crying from Unit 23, ignore it. Rule 3: if Unit 23 is found open, close it immediately. What happened? I asked. Guards kept breaking the rules. They'd hear crying and investigate. They'd find the unit open and look inside. Each time, the entity learned something new. Now look at what we have. He showed me the current list, 15 rules and growing. At this rate, pretty soon the entire facility will be too dangerous to work in. I stared at the lists, my mind racing. What if we just got rid of Unit 23 entirely? Tore it down? Rick shook his head. We tried that. Had a demolition crew come in during the day. When they broke open the unit, it was completely empty. But that night... He shuddered. That night was the worst we'd ever had. Whatever's in there doesn't like being disturbed during the day. So we're stuck with it? Unless we can find someone who knows how to properly deal with this kind of thing. And so far, we haven't had any luck. I spent the rest of the day trying to decide whether to quit or not. On one hand, the job was clearly dangerous. On the other hand, I was desperate for money, and Rick had said that most nights were quiet. In the end, desperation won out. I showed up for my third night shift, armed with the updated list of rules and a thermos full of strong coffee. The night started quietly enough. I did my rounds, avoided the problem areas, and tried to stay calm. But around 2 a.m., things started getting weird again. I was sitting in the office, monitoring the camera feeds, when I noticed something strange. One of the cameras, the one pointed at Building D, was showing something that didn't match what I could see through the office window. According to the camera, Building D was brightly lit, with all the fluorescent lights on. But when I looked out the window, the building appeared dark and empty. I switched to a different camera feed and then back to Building D, same thing, the camera showed lights, but my eyes saw darkness. That's when I remembered Rule 5, if you see lights flickering in Building D, do not enter that building for the remainder of your shift. But the lights weren't flickering. According to the camera, they were steady and bright. The rule didn't technically apply. I decided to investigate. That was my first mistake. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward Building D. As I got closer, I could see that the building was definitely dark, no lights at all. But when I checked the camera feed on my phone, it still showed the building as brightly lit. I reached the entrance to Building D and tried the handle. The door was unlocked, which was strange, all the buildings were supposed to be locked during my shift. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The building was pitch black, just as it had appeared from the outside. But there was something wrong with the darkness. It was too thick, too complete. My flashlight beam barely penetrated it, and when it did, the light seemed to get absorbed by the blackness like ink in water. I stepped inside. The door creaked shut behind me, and the air changed, thicker, colder, like I'd entered a vacuum. Even my breathing sounded muffled. The silence was unnatural, like the building itself was holding its breath. As I moved deeper into Building D, a low hum began vibrating through the walls. My flashlight flickered, struggling against the darkness. The deeper I went, the more the place seemed to warp around me, shadows moved where they shouldn't, and the layout felt different. Then I saw it. At the far end of the corridor, Unit 84. The door marked with yellow tape. The one I was never supposed to enter. It was open. A pulsing, violet light leaked out from inside. It was mesmerizing, and even though everything in me screamed to run, my legs carried me forward. Inside was wrong. The unit was far too large on the inside, vast, cavernous, like I'd stepped into another dimension. Walls lined with mirrors, but none of them reflected me. Instead, I saw other versions of myself, some screaming, some running, some smiling back at me with eyes that weren't mine. In the center of the room was a child. Or at least, it looked like one. It stood motionless, facing away from me, dressed in tattered clothes. Its head tilted slowly, like it sensed me. I wanted to move. I couldn't. My body was frozen, like it wasn't mine anymore. Then it spoke, in a voice layered with echoes and static, ancient and young at the same time. "You broke too many rules, Mike." I tried to scream, to apologize, to run, anything. But the mirrors around me began cracking, one by one, shattering with screams that weren't mine. My reflection flickered between versions of myself, alive, dead, twisted. "You opened the door." The light exploded. I woke up in the office chair. 6:59 a.m. The radio crackled beside me, playing soft static. My logbook was closed. The monitor feeds were blank. I blinked. I was fine. Everything looked normal. But I wasn't the same. Rick showed up a few minutes later, surprised to see me. "You made it through another night?" I nodded slowly, but I couldn't speak. My throat felt wrong. He handed me a coffee. "Still planning to stick around?" I opened my mouth to say, no. What came out was, "I think I'll stay." Rick stared at me for a moment. A long moment. Then he nodded once and walked off. As I watched him go, I caught my reflection in the office window. And it smiled back at me, before I did.